Apple's new commercial is causing quite a stir. I mean, it makes sense. Just look at it.
We shall prevail.
Oops, wrong commercial. Obviously, I was talking about the one where they crush everything.
Standing quality photos. A full 3-inch touchscreen for easy interaction and Wi-Fi connectivity. Introducing the LG Renoir, the new 8-megapixel camera phone.
What the hell, man? That was the LG commercial. They don't even make phones anymore. I'm obviously talking about the iPad commercial. Just play that one. Wait, was that the right commercial? I just don't see how anyone could be outraged by Steve wouldn't have shipped this ad. It would have pained him too much to watch it. Just a terribly cruel image. This ain't it, Chiefs. I'm not sure wanton destruction of all the good and beautiful things in this world was really the vibe you were trying for. I can't relate to this video at all. It lacks any respect for creative equipment and mocks the creators. You destroyed all the creative tools and efforts of humans. Worst commercial ever. Crushing symbols of human creativity and cultural achievement to appeal to pro creators. Nice. Maybe for the next Apple Watch Pro, you should crush sports equipment, show a robot running faster than a man, then turn to the camera and say, God is dead and we have killed him. Anyways, before we go further, I should quickly drop my biases. Bias 1, I'm an investor in Apple, and I'm considered by many to be an Apple fanboy. Obviously, I've spent a lot of money on Apple products and have used them for a while. Point 2, I'm also very well known as an Apple hater, a chronic one. I used to be a hardcore Android and Linux guy. I even have a bunch of videos discussing in detail how evil Apple can be. So if you don't like my takes, you can write me off in so many different ways. Isn't that fun? Chapter 1, why everyone hates this ad. I'll be honest, it took me a bit to understand why people were so angry. I think I figured it out though. It's not the ad itself that most people are upset by. It's a projection, fueled by separate, unrelated frustrations. I've identified 3 core drivers here: hatred of the iPad, hatred of AI, and a general hatred of Apple and big companies as a whole. Let's start with the iPad, as I've been surprised by how much people hate it. I'll admit, I've had the same iPad all the way back since 2018, and I don't really use it that much. I find that many tech bubble people like myself are in a similar boat. We need a real computer to do a lot of what we do. We're not the customer for the iPad though. The form factor, screen, and pencil make the iPad unrivaled for creative professionals. The battery life plus the 5G support makes it a really useful business tool for more businessy folks as well. And for everyone else...
What's a computer?
Quick pause though, because I want to talk about the kid there. Not them specifically, but the idea of children and iPads, because it touches on something that I honestly missed originally. Parents. Parents hate the iPad. The iPad kids thing isn't just a meme. The iPad has driven wars in their household. Parents have been fighting to drive their kids away from the screen for as long as iPads have existed. Often they're just trying to drive kids towards things that are more creative or physical or real. And those are the things that Apple destroyed in this ad. I still think it's kind of silly to be so outraged, but at least I'm starting to understand where some of that comes from. Speaking of outrage that I'm only starting to understand, let's talk about AI for a second, because this iPad event was the first time Apple ever used AI to describe the things they were building. The creative world is terrified of AI, and rightfully so. Tools like Midjourney, Sora, even ChatGPT are representative of existential threats to multiple creative domains. Creatives feel like their world is being destroyed right in front of them. This made Apple's destruction of creative tools feel really personal, and boy, did they take it personally. The last point of frustration is, of course, Apple itself. Part of this is the usual big companies bad thing, which sure, big companies have financial incentives and aren't always acting in our interests, but I hate when nonsense like this goes mainstream when there are so many better things we could be shitting on Apple for. Like, all the things on my other videos on this channel. You should go check those out if you want examples. Usually with drama like this, I see a lot more disdain from the anti-Apple folks. I've been incredibly surprised to see the opposite, with lots of tweets from Apple haters confused about why everyone's so frustrated. The confusion is largely why I'm making this video. It seems like the hate isn't coming from the usual crop of Apple haters, which means some people are actually missing the point of the ad. So I guess we should talk about that, huh? Chapter 2, Apple's intent. This ad is not meant to represent the destruction of everything you love. Quite the opposite, in fact. It's meant to show the essence of those things being compressed into a smaller and different form. It's almost certainly a reference to this Pokemon commercial from 26 years ago. All of the beloved Pokemon are being compressed into a handheld device. It's visceral, it's stunning, it's art through destruction. Speaking of art through destruction, I think it's time for my first hot take of the video. All art, is destructive. You can't make a painting without destroying the paint in the canvas. You can't play guitar without eventually breaking a string. You can't render an AI image without burning tons of energy. Thankfully, no real creative tools were destroyed for this ad. It's clearly a combination of props and CGI. It doesn't change how we feel about it, though, and that's what makes it art. Chapter 3. Interpretation. Good art begs for us to project our own feelings and emotions onto it directly. This has been the case since we started painting on caves with berries way back. Interpretation's the core of art. When we stray too far from that messy reality, we end up projecting weird, virtuous expectations on the artists. This happened to Arnold Schoenberg in the 1800s, where he challenged the centuries-old norm of traditional classical piano, playing new melodies that didn't fit our expectations. This also happened to John Cage when he challenged us to think about the musicality in all sound, not just those from instruments, even silence. This happened to every early electronic artist as well, who were mocked and told they'd never be real musicians because they don't play instruments live. If you couldn't tell, I'm a nerd about music. Hell, I have a degree in it. I studied under the late Pauline Oliveros. I love art that pushes boundaries, and I hate when the boundary pushers are pushed out of art entirely. I think they're artists and they should be treated accordingly. The core point I'm trying to make here in bringing all of this up is to highlight a contrast between interpretation and ignorance. All art has to be interpreted by those experiencing it. The room left for interpretation, sadly, also leaves room for ignorance to be inserted. If you see an EDM artist go viral with a song that has a sample from another artist, you might see that as theft. If you go to a John Cage show and discover that 433 is literal silence, him just sitting in front of the piano, you might see that as an insult to pianists. If somebody's doing graffiti on a blank wall, you might see that as vandalism. Personally, I find all of these examples to be incredibly ignorant, just outright refusals of art styles that they're not interested in. Let's bring this back to the iPad, though. Apple no longer respects creatives if they're making ads like this. Steve Jobs would never let this ad be published. This commercial is terrible, and anyone who thinks otherwise needs to experience real art. All of these takes are incredibly ignorant. They're not interpretations of the commercial. They're self-owns that expect art to make them feel good, not to challenge them. To be clear, you can dislike this commercial without being ignorant and weirdly anti-art. Seeing creative tools that I love crushed into an iPad made me feel uncomfortable. That's a totally reasonable take. It doesn't project their interpretation on the world. It doesn't belittle the art in question. It just presents how they interpreted it and how it made them feel. Speaking of feelings and art, Chapter 4, the artistic merit of the iPad commercial. I like to think that I've convinced a few of you to approach this with a more open mind. Time to ruin that real quick. Before all this drama, I didn't think much of the commercial as an art piece. To be clear, when I saw it live during the conference, I thought it was a great commercial. I just didn't think through the artistic merit. Remember when I said earlier that art's all about interpretation? The massive variety of interpretations has turned this commercial into a piece of art itself. When Duchamp presented a urinal in an art exhibit back in the early 1900s, it wasn't art. When people started interpreting it in a hilariously wide range of ways, Fountain became a really important and critical art piece from the 20th century. I'm not saying that this commercial is a massive, century-defining, impactful piece of art, but I do think the same types of people are mad about this that were mad about Fountain. Speaking of anger, I have one more important thing that we need to talk about here. Chapter 5. All press is good press. This terrible phrase came from the Reagan era. It hasn't been true for decades now. It arguably wasn't even true at the time. Bad press absolutely exists, and it causes profound consequences for companies of all kinds. I've seen some insane speculation that this is some 200 IQ play by Apple. They supposedly knew that it would be a controversial commercial, and after they let the controversy go on for a bit, they could retract it, keep the news cycle going, get everyone to freak out about this new iPad. Well, yeah, they did walk it back, saying that they missed the mark. And I hate that they did this, because now I'm stuck defending the artistic merit of an iPad commercial that they've already given up on. Why do I do this? Ugh. Anyways, there is truth in the statement, though. They did kind of miss the mark here. They left way too much room for interpretation. And at the size of Apple, room for interpretation is room for a lot of things, from disdain to ignorance to frustrations, and they all have enough space to build and stew and become something greater. And to those who said Steve would have never let this happen, you're kind of right. He certainly would never have walked it back.